everybody, and welcome back to What Called Show. We are here again with another lovely horror podcast for you, as we have been every week at the moment. So it's hosted by me, Ash Millman, and I'm joined by she, Kirsten Rhea.
Hello!
There she is. And also by he, Josh Brown. So hello, Josh.
Hello.
Yes, and we are I've forgotten the name that we called ourselves last week, the Terrible Trident, the Gruesome Threesome. There's all sorts of weird names for the little horror threesome, horror trident we've got going on at the moment.
We did so well last time. It was the Trident of Terror, then it was the Scream Team. We had two very good names. And we're back
Scream
to the
Team.
Terrible Threesome.
I forget that. All right, okay. The Trident of Terror and the Scream Team are definitely the best ones. So pretend that I introduced us as that and not the Terrible Three. But yeah, a suitably spooky name for a suitably spooky podcast, and for suitably spooky shenanigans, we're going to talk about horror movie openings this week. So we've been kind of breaking down horror movies and our favorite parts of them and what constructs them over the past few weeks that we have been doing this. So we've moved on to opening this week because you can't have a good horror movie without a good opening. Change my mind. It's just necessary to having a great movie. So we've collected some of our favorites, some of the conventions that make up really good openings, and maybe we'll look at some of the bad ones as well, or openings that have outlasted their films, because you can just slap on a bad film and it kind of makes it mediocre as well. There's all sorts of things about openings that go into constructing horror movies. But like I say, you need a good one to make a good horror movie. So guys, what do you think? What do you think about horror movie openings? Do you agree with that statement? And what are your favorite aspects that you want to see? If you open up a horror movie and you're ready for some scares, are you like, hey, I want to see this, this, and this, or I'm not interested, I'm going to turn it off?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think when it comes to horror, especially as a genre, I want a good opening to grip me. I want to know that I'm in a safe pair of hands, and there's nothing more satisfying. We were talking about cinema experiences last week than being in the cinema, waiting for the titles to hit, having a suitably spooky or atmospheric opening that properly sets the tone, and just kind of breathing a sigh of relief of, I'm so pleased I'm here. I'm so excited of what's to come. But that said, I don't think it's very easy. And for me personally, I've seen more bad horror movie openings than I have good ones. There are a few exceptions, obviously, which we're going to talk about here. We're going to focus on those. But I do think it's quite difficult because you have to essentially kind of sum up what the horror movie is going to be about. You have to get a lot of stuff introduced. You have to introduce the tone, often the main villain, the main characters and stuff like that. And I think it's kind of hard to do that without completely ruining the surprise or revealing too much. That's, for me, the worst thing a horror movie opening can do, is just reveal too much, either about the plot, about the killer, about whatever. You need to make it almost a tone piece and give the audience a hook for what's to come, at least in my opinion. And I think a lot of horror movies do that through cold opens more than anything else.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think with like cold opens for a horror movie, I think it's really nice because I feel like they're kind of split into two categories, where it's like category one, which is like straight into the horror, and it's like, this is what's going to happen. It's scary, it's dark, it's dingy, like Josh said. And then I think there's like the second half, which tried to make you feel more at ease, and it's like, oh, everything's fine and everything's good, and then like, bam, no, it's not, this is happening, and this is what the film's about. And then it's like it hooks you in like a different way, because you get comfortable and then you're like, oh, this is what's happening, exciting. Whereas the other ones are just straight away, you're like, yep, straight away, first couple of minutes of the film, I'm not enjoying this. This is going to be horrible and scary. And I think they both work really, really well.
Do you guys think that you need like a scary opening to have a scary experience with the film, or do you think it works better with a slow build? Because there's so many different like schools of horror movie openings that you can subscribe to. And I think a lot of the ones that we're going to mention in this all have a cold open or a little action sequence at the beginning that kind of sets them apart and says, okay, here's your little taster. Now sign up for the whole damn ice cream, or whatever they're going to say to you. They basically give you a little hint, a little treat of what's to come. Do you think that that's kind of necessary, or do you much prefer it when they just go straight in and give you a slow build? Or do you think it can work both ways? All these questions for you.
I like it. I like it both ways, but I think for me, it's more difficult to go all in at the start and then kind of hook me. That's going to sound hypocritical, because a lot of the ones I've chosen for this podcast are actually cold opens. But I think a mistake that a lot of horror movies make, and a lot of horror TV especially, is by throwing you straight into a horrific situation with characters you don't know about. Then they immediately get killed off, and you're just kind of thinking, well, what do I care? I don't really care about this character whose name I barely know or whatever. And for me, I prefer kind of like a more atmospheric build. Like my favorite horror movie of all time is The Exorcist, and I often forget that movie just starts in a completely different country, looking at this little statue of a demon with Father Merrin, and it's kind of visually it's disconnected from the rest of the movie, but that in itself works when you are then informed about what the movie actually is about. It's so jarring and weird that it becomes scary even on the surface. It's not that kind of there's nothing jumping out. There's not really a monster there. It's just kind of this tension builder about a mystery that you don't know about. And I think for me, setting the mood is more important than establishing characters. I just want to know through the visuals, through the sounds, through the way the opening moves into the title credits or something, that I'm in, like I said, like a safe pair of hands. So for as good as cold opens can be in an opening death or something as big as that, for me, it has to be done expertly well. And fortunately, for us, the choices we picked today are the very best in class, in my opinion, of doing that kind of opening extremely well and kind of essentially going against everything I've just said.
I think it's definitely like a cliche. It's something that horror movies look at and think, oh, I've got to replicate that to be a horror movie, to be a good horror movie. I've got to have my cold open. I've got to have my expendable death. I think, like you said with horror TV, I think it's something deeply rooted in that monster of the week kind of format where they give you a monster, it kills someone, and then they've got to figure out who the monster is, who the person that's died, and figure it all out that way. So it's definitely something. Horror TV kind of feels like pre-packaged horror movies condensed into an hour and follows all the tropes and cliches. So I think it's a lot harder for them to break out of this mold. But films, they can experiment a lot more. So it's really interesting that they still stick to these formulas and sometimes do them incredibly well and sometimes just throw them in because it's what makes a horror movie. What do you think about them, Kirsten? Are you like the cold openings, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think like Josh said, as long as they're done well, then it's fine. But I just think it's how they do it. Like I don't mind a slow build as long as it's not too slow. I don't want to get halfway through the film and still feel like it's building to that sort of point where you're like, oh, this is what's going on, because that's too long. I think a few minutes into the film, that's then when they start sort of dropping hints as in like, this is the scary thing, that's fine. But I think past that point, you start kind of losing interest. You're like, no, I kind of want to know what's going on now. But then I also don't think that they should jump straight into it sometimes, because like, to give a bad example that I've sort of was thinking about is in Escape Room, how they kind of chuck you straight in and it's like action, action, action. Oh, this is happening. Look at this person might die, but they might not. Oh, what's going to happen? But at the same time, it's like there's just so much being thrown at you that you're just like, what is going on? And it kind of intrigues you in a sense that you're like, I need to know what's going on. How did he get here? But at the same time, you're like, well, now I know that he makes it to whatever point this is. So the whole film, you're kind of watching it like, well, he's made it. He's not going to die here because this isn't the room that he was in. Well, he's not going to die here. That's not the room he was in. So it kind of spoils it in a way. So yeah, as long as it's done well, then I think it's definitely worth having, and it's something a horror film needs to have. But I just think that sometimes they can just go that little bit too far, or maybe not far enough. So yeah, it has to be a happy medium, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. On the flash forward technique is lazy to me. It's like, oh, here's our best bit. Here's our most exciting bit. Make sure you stick around for it. And then it's going to happen. And then, oh, maybe you won't know what's going on. Escape Room, I really liked Escape Room, but the beginning and the ending were like awful. It was just the middle that actually succeeded in doing what it wanted to do. But then it had like a sequel bait ending and a flash forward beginning. And I was like, you didn't need to wrap this up like this. You didn't need to. You had so many good things going for you. This was not the way to do it. But yeah, what would you say you guys' favorite horror movie openings then, to go for examples? Because for me, it's Jaws. Like, it's always been Jaws. It has to be Jaws. And that is absolutely classic cold open. Oh my God, there's a big shark in the sea. A girl's going to die. I just think the way that it is done plays on so many natural fears that you have of water and sharks and the ocean, or naturals I have. I hate it. I hate the sea. I think it plays with that so well. And the build-up of music, the introduction of the iconic theme, where you don't actually see what the monster is. You just see a very quiet, very sudden death and then learn about it afterwards. I think Jaws does it so well, and that would be my perfect horror movie opening. If only all films could do that, but they cannot. How about you guys?
I think Jaws is a great example, because I think when it comes to horror movie openings, the very best, in my opinion, work almost as their own individual short films. They might not even necessarily have much to do with the actual plot, as long as you can kind of capture what the movie's about. And Jaws in essence, like the opening does that so well. If you just watch the opening of Jaws without the rest of the movie, you can have an effective time, you know what I mean? And for me, that's kind of similar to, I would say, Scream. I don't think we can do a video on the best horror movie openings without mentioning Scream, because that is, especially at the time, was so subversive. Like, it's being parodied to hell now. You can't really watch the original Scream without thinking of Scary Movie or all of the ridiculous things that came after it. But the idea of having that kind of meta opening where you have a killer commenting on how horror movies are structured, and then you have Drew Barrymore, who was and still is a huge star, getting offed in the opening minutes. It is surprising, it's subversive, and it kind of shakes what you think you know about the film. We've like you mentioned there, you know, some of the worst openings, some of the bad cold openings kind of give you, they work on a formula, they work on a way that you know exactly what you're getting when you go into it. And sometimes that's what you want. But for me, when I go to a horror movie, I want to be surprised. And if an opening manages to do that, or shocked, like Jaws or Scream or whatever, that's when I know it's going to be something special, because I'm already destabilized. I'm not kind of enjoying the status quo. I've already been knocked off course by whatever it has in store.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different types of them. The one that comes to mind when you talk about being knocked off course, which I know you've written down to talk about later, is absolutely Midsummer, but we'll get back to that one. I watched that again recently and was like, and realized how effective it was as an actual movie. But yeah, I think you've got one that's a great knocked off course one, Kirsten, that I know you mentioned is your favorite.
Yes, Ghost Ship has to be one of the best horror openings in ages. I've never seen an open like that. It's just so good, because it's one of those ones, like I said, makes you feel so comfortable, but you know something's going to happen because it's called Ghost Ship, so clearly something bad is going to happen.
There's got to be a ghost on it.
There's going to be a ghost, and where do they come from? So it's just brilliant, because it starts off and it's just this, you know, it's like they're on a cruise, everyone's really happy and they're all dancing and they're having a good time, and they're on like the front of the ship. I don't know ship terms, so the front of the ship, and they're all dancing and there's this music playing, and then all of a sudden everything starts getting quite slow and dark and dingy, and then just out of nowhere this like wire just zips through them, and it's just like the ultimate shock factor. You're just like, whoa, hang on, it's like a blink and you'll miss it, and you're like, wait, what just happened? Did something? And then it's just this wire with this blood dripping down, and then you just kind of click like, oh, that's where the ghosts come from. And it's just perfect, because they don't show you too much, but they show you just enough of these people, just their body parts just slowly kind of like, you know, getting cut in half. Not cut in half, they already are, but they're just, it's like that moment in Resident Evil where he just kind of like, he's a bunch of cubes all of a sudden. It's just so brilliantly done. And then it just ends with Emily Browning just screaming, and it just echoes off into the distance. And it's perfect. And it just sets you up to be like, wow, how did this happen? I need to, you know, I don't care how much of this film I watch, I need to know, like, you know, is this an accident? Is it something supernatural? Is it a murderer? It just grips you in the perfect way. And it's just, I don't even remember a lot of what even happens in that film, but that opening will just always stick with me. It's brilliant.
I think that's like such an interesting point, that there are openings out there that kind of supersede the films that they are, because Ghost Ship is like the ultimate opening. Darkness Falls as well, I think, is one that has to be brought up to that, with the creepy like candlelight opening where they introduce a monster, and then it's got that beastie floating around that boy's room ready to abduct him and stuff. I know so many people have spoken about that scarring them as a kid because they watched it too young. But Darkness Falls and Ghost Ship, I feel like, are the films that you watch and then you don't remember them, you just remember their openings, which says a lot for how successful an opening can be. And again, elevating a bad horror movie into at least a mediocre one, or one that has like a cult following and that people enjoy quite a lot. I also think Ghost Ship is really interesting. This is a massive tangent, but I think Ghost Ship is really interesting because it has such a weird font choice at the beginning, which kind of ties into that whole like what you expect from the movie. If I remember rightly, Ghost Ship has like big pink fancy letters, like it's like
it makes
Ghost
it start off to feel like it's not going to be. And like I think I remember sitting down and watching it when I first put it on, and I was like, am I watching the right film? Like, have I actually clicked on like, is it some sort of romance horror, like not romance horror, but like a romantic comedy or something? So yeah, I think that's a perfect example of just completely kind of throwing you off and being like, oh, hang on, and you kind of like have to do a little bit of research of like, am I watching the right film here? And then just bam, out of nowhere, you're like, no, yes, I am. This is correct. This is a horror film. Okay, good. Yeah, it's good.
Yes, absolutely. I think that kind of like diversion with title cards is also something that we should talk about, because the art of the title that we can talk about, and also that is a great website as well. They kind of had an interview with Drew Goddard, who obviously directed The Cabin in the Woods, and his main title designers from PIC Agency, who did their thing together. And he came up with this quote, which was, for me, there is almost no better way to set the tone of a film than with the titles, and that could be simple and elegant, quiet and restrained, or it could be full of bombast. There's so many different ways to play it, and because as an audience we're conditioned to seeing titles early, it is a wonderful way to communicate a tone without having to hit the audience over the head. And it kind of condenses that whole thing about openings into title cards. And I think that is a really interesting concept. Do you guys think that title cards are the key to the movie? Do they introduce you to everything? Are they what hooks you? If you see a bad title card, are you going to turn off? Or do you think a good one will solidify your interest to the end? Does it tell you everything you need to know?
I wouldn't turn it off, but I do take some perverse pleasure in a really good one. It's kind of the same, not to talk about gaming, but when I put a new video game in the title screen is really good. If it's got a bad title screen, I'm already a bit wary of it. If you can capture, like you said, the feeling of a movie or the tone of the movie just with the font, you're already doing something right, because it indicates that you've got a cohesive idea what the movie should be, and that you've taken the time to kind of dive into every little detail that other people might find, superfluous or something. For me, I'm a big fan of the pretentious fonts. Anything that's quite simple and elegant, Helvetica or something. When I see that pop up, I know exactly that I'm in for the kind of movie that I want. I remember seeing The Lighthouse when that title came up. I thought, right, I'm enjoying this. I already thought it was a good opening. It's just Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe on the boat with this booming soundtrack kind of wailing in and out while they're going to the lighthouse, all in black and white. And I just thought that is so simple and elegant, yet so effective, that I couldn't help but, like you said, be cautiously optimistic about the rest of the movie to come, because everything felt so considered. And yet, on the other hand, if you get something that just kind of seems slapped together, that again is indicative of how slapped together the movie might have been, how unfocused the rest of the film might be, how they haven't taken the time to go into these details. So I don't think it's necessarily make or break, but it's certainly a factor that goes unnoticed. And to be honest, I'm quite pleased you brought that up, because I thought it was just me being a bit obsessive with everything. I didn't realize that, Drew Goddard especially is into fonts as I seem to be. Look, I'm not on the level as Rich. I'm not like Rich of obsessing over fonts, but a good horror font. Mwah.
No, I love a drip font. I love a chiller. But the Cabin in the Woods, I think the way that uses its titles is a jump scare in itself. Like, it has like the general coffee machine scene where they're walking around the office debriefing, and then have like, oh, it's Cabin in the Woods, jump scare. Is a great way of conveying everything you need to know about that film in the first like minute or so. And I think it kind of, also talking about fonts, I'm going to have to bring up your favorite movie ever, Josh, Climax. Because that was the film that when I saw the font, when I saw the title cards pop up, and I was like, what is this writing? I was hooked. I was like, I need to see this through to the end, because I need to know what the hell this is about. Like, why are they all floating in and out? So it's got me too excited. I can't get my words out. Why they're all floating in and out, why they're all changing. And that kind of represents the whole manipulation of their time and space through being on loads of drugs and not knowing what's going on, and the fluidity of the camera and everything. I think that being able to distill that into a really great title card, which is so specific and such a small moment of a horror movie, kind of gives you a little bit of insight into how much they care about their film and how much they want to portray it in every single thing. This art of the title interview with Drew Goddard is really interesting, because loads of it is just about him looking at the viscosity of Hershey's chocolate syrup and how they use that to create blood. But yeah, I think that's another interesting. What do you think about title cards, Kirsten? Is there any that stood out to you that you're like, hell, I need to see the rest of the film attached to this card?
Yeah, I think like Josh said, there's something that's quite nice about having a nice minimalistic font, like, because that it's like, we don't need this title card to speak for the movie itself, because clearly they think that the movie itself is going to be good enough they don't need a good title card. But I do love, like you said, Ash, when they do put that time and effort into a title card to kind of resemble what the film is going to be about. And for me, a perfect example of that is the Insidious title card, because that's another one that's just like a jump scare, and it's just like the and all like the violins and everything, and that's a sound that does crop up quite a lot in Insidious. So you're like, this is what I'm in for, is it? It's going to be a lot of like loud sounds and jump scares, and just being able to sort of input that within the title itself. And like I said, with climax, having that portray what might be going on within the film is really clever. And there's a good beauty and a bit of enjoyment in that. So it doesn't bother me too much, as long as, like Josh said, it's not slapped together, because you can kind of think like, well, clearly they didn't care enough to actually put a title card in there. But yeah, I personally do enjoy when you can pick apart the title card a bit and be like, oh, what does that mean? Oh, are we going to see where that's leading to? So yeah, I like one that's had a bit of effort put into it.
Absolutely. I think it's just the inner like film student like coming out being like, I need to dissect everything and write about it on like the PowerPoint and pick out all the good things. But yeah, now we've spoken about ones that have kind of self-contained action and cold opens. And then I think it's kind of time to move on to slow burns as well, so we don't talk about fonts forever. Because there are lots of movies that do start slow and do it really, really well without like losing interest. And I think like stuff like Psycho, Rosemary's Baby, Alien, The Invitation, House of the Devil, films like that manage to set something up without revealing their central premise, but keeping your interest just plucked along nicely enough to make you invest in the movie and invest in its story straight away, without relying on jump scares, without relying on fright for a horror movie, which is quite a brave move. I think that's a really impressive way of doing them, but I don't know that many that come to mind straight away that impressed me or have stuck with me. I think Psycho is the perfect one out of that list I just mentioned, because it's a Hitchcock film. It's the granddaddy of slashers and all that sort of thing.
I think it's like all of the ones that you mentioned there are so good, but for me, I think it's hard to do, because we talk a lot about how you pace horror in these podcasts and how you kind of pay off the audience's investment with a jump scare, then you almost reset and start it again. But like you were saying earlier, Kirsten, sometimes you get these slow burn movies that purposefully withhold that catharsis of the jump scare, and they make you wait for it. And for me, that works because it means the tension almost reaches an unbearable point where you are analyzing everything in the scene. You are waiting for something to happen. And Psycho is a great example. But for me, it's actually House of the Devil. I love that movie because it makes you wait so long for that like kind of final crescendo of violence and figuring out what everything that's happening. So I would definitely choose something like that, where everything is normal, but I like it when the soundtrack kind of informs you that something's off, or a few stray visuals, nothing big or loud, but just when a movie has such control over its pacing and direction and performances that it is able to go from scene to scene of seemingly nothing happening while keeping the building dread in the back of your mind and keeping you worried about where it is eventually going to go, because it has to go somewhere. If it doesn't have a payoff, then it's completely failed. But if it has a payoff that is kind of that lives up to that investment, then it more than works for me.
Yeah, I think slow burn starts have to be attached to an excellent movie to work. You can't have there's no slow burn start out there that stands out as an excellent opening despite the movie being quite bad. You're not going to have Ghost Ship where like you spend 45 minutes waiting for these people to get chopped with a wire, unfortunately. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right with everything you've said about slow burn, and House of the Devil as well. I think it's just the best example of it, because I remember first watching that. I fell asleep. I fall asleep so much when I'm watching films at home. I fell asleep, and I realized the next day when I went on to watch the end, I'd watched like an hour of it without anything actually horror happening in it. And I was like, wow, that's obviously a very good story, a story that has invested me that much to watch an hour of it where I'm not actually getting any horror out of my horror movie. And it's just built on tension and scary things and trying to guess what's going on, all that sort of thing. House of the Devil, ooh, chef's kiss. Are there any slow burns for you, Kirsten, that you think stand out? Or do you prefer them? Do you think that the cold open is the one for you?
Yeah, I think a good cold open is definitely one that grips me, because I personally can't think of any slow burns that were good in my mind. It's just like you said, it was probably Psycho is the only one that I can think of that still managed to retain my attention, because a lot of the other ones, if I get to 5-10 minutes in and I still feel like nothing's happening, I do really easily start to lose interest. So I again, if it does have a really good storyline and it can still grip me without anything scary happening, then kudos to the movie. But yeah, I just can't. No good ones really come to my mind. I've got examples of like great cold opens that lead into like awful movies, and then awful cold opens that lead into really good movies. But yeah, nothing comes to mind as like a slow burn that I was like, I'll stick with it. It. It's not enough for me.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I think all three of us are at the same time. What were you going to say, Josh?
I was going to say, I like that we mentioned Hitchcock, because I was rewatching The Birds a few weeks ago, and I was kind of shocked at how long it takes for, like the birds to attack in that movie. But it's not to the detriment of the film, because it spends, the first 40 minutes, half an hour or whatever, just building up the characters and getting you invested in this world. And I think Hitchcock does that almost better than anyone else by, before the plot kicks in, getting you interested in the minutiae of the day-to-day lives of these people and getting you actually emotionally invested in the story. So when things do start going completely tits up, you actually care, because I think fundamentally that's an important thing that a lot of horror movies kind of take for granted, is your emotional investment in them. I don't want to watch an hour and a half of a bunch of teenagers getting killed if I don't care about them. Obviously, I might do after a few pints with some friends, but it's not what I'm there for. I want those deaths to mean something beyond just kind of like gore or the spectacle of violence or something like that. So for me, it's a worthy sacrifice if the characters are interesting enough, if the world is interesting enough, if the plot is interesting enough to take the time to have that set up, because ultimately, like we just said, if the payoff is good, and it certainly is in Psycho and The Birds, it works because you care about what you're watching.
Do you think horror movies can recover from bad openings? Do you think that there's any excellent horror movies out there that have really bad openings but still manage to bring it back round? Because that kind of brings us back to the start of the podcast, where I was like, you need a good opening to have a good movie. But like, would you agree with that? Do you think that there is any film out there that has a bad opening that doesn't quite manage to stay there and elevates itself afterwards?
Yeah, no, for me, I think, and this is probably a controversial opinion, but Funny Games, I watched the remake before I watched the original. And I just remember sitting there being like, what the hell am I watching? Because it's just this like family in a car, and then it's just like this big title screen. It's like Funny Games, but then it's like this rock music that's just like way too loud and you can't really hear what people are saying. And I was just like, who put this thing together? It just seemed really poorly done, and I started to lose interest straight away. But I was like, no, I've heard really good things, I'm going to stick with it. And then it turned out to be a really, really good like horror thriller, and it had a brilliant concept, brilliant characters, and just ends up being like completely morbid, and was just like quite meta as well. So I was like really pleasantly surprised. But yeah, just from that offset, I was like, I don't think I want to watch this. It just kind of, yeah, I was almost angry. I was just like, I can't believe people have told me to watch this film. It seems really awful. And then, yeah, I stuck with it purely because I heard good things. And yeah, it was brilliant. But yeah, it's just proof that you can recover from a very poor opening in my eyes.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one exception I will give to my own rule would be probably Drag Me to Hell, purely because I don't think the opening is the worst opening. I think it's a contrived opening. I think I've seen it in a million other horror movies. I don't think it's a bad opening. I just don't think it does anything. But then I think the rest of the film kind of backs that up, because it plays with conventions and kind of delivers a really straightforward horror movie whilst also putting loads of underlying black comedy into it that people don't always pick up on. And I feel like the opening kind of sets that standard where it's like, oh, this is everything you've seen before, but a little bit different and with lots of underlying messages that maybe you don't pick up on. So as much as it like appears as a worse off opening than it could have had, because it's just that standard seance scene where they're like, oh, there's an evil demon that I'm going to face again in the future. God damn you, demon. Quite literally, because it's a demon. But yeah, having that as the opening and then managing to star that out, I think is a big point for Drag Me to Hell. Because if I'd have just watched that and then walked away, I don't think I would have been interested at all. But like sticking with it and going, oh, okay, no worry, don't worry, and coming back to it again, I was like, oh yes, actually the opening does work and it is good.
It's funny, like sometimes when a movie has not even necessarily a bad opening, but if it has a kind of weird thing to start with, my mind just kind of eliminates it. Like for this, I was going to choose 28 Days Later, with Cillian Murphy wandering around London and stuff. But I forgot about the bit right at the very beginning where they're with the rage-infected animals and they're kind of going crazy. And I was like, this isn't quite as effective as I want it to be. This is kind of, this is a bit daft now. I'm not sure if I like this. And it's funny that like my mind just forgot that part happened and jumped straight to Cillian Murphy waking up, wandering around this desolate streets, because that's the thing that's the most effective. For me, though, I think it's always an ending. It doesn't matter if a movie has a bad opening, as long as it pulls off the ending, then it's still a win in my eyes. There are a few movies that have done that because, like we've been saying, an opening is often indicative of how things are going to go. And I can't think of many off the top of my head that have recovered from an outright terrible start. But at the same time, I would put more value on finishing well than starting well.
Yeah. What do you guys think? I'm going to bring this up as kind of a finishing thought. What do you guys think about the Halloween opening? Because that's one of the ones that gets brought up a lot as one of the best openings of all time. But it is just like a point of view little moment with what's revealed to be young Michael Myers when he kills his sister. Do you guys think that is like the ultimate horror movie opening, or do you think that maybe it's been overdone now in the years since its release, or do you think that it still works as the blueprint for cold opens for sort of horror movies? Because that one gets brought up so much that we can't not mention it on this podcast. I thought that's a good question to ask you.
For me, it doesn't quite work in a modern context. I think if you put it into, where slasher movies were at the time, and it kind of popularizing a trope or a style of filmmaking, obviously it works. I'm not going to say it's bad or anything, but I think after we've seen that kind of similar cold open done over and over again, it has lost something. Because obviously when I was doing the same research and trying to figure out which were my favorite openings, that kept popping up because of course it keeps popping up. But for me personally, it's not as effective as it might have been for other people, because by the time I got to Halloween and give it the proper time of day it deserved, I'd seen so many movies just rip it off and try it, and in some cases do it more effectively, that I don't hold it up there as kind of like the best of the best. I'm not saying it's bad by any means. I do think it's very great at kind of establishing the tone and unsettling you straight away and introducing you to the villain and stuff and what you should expect. But I don't think, for me, I would put it in my personal top 10 horror movie openings.
Not even top 10?
Not even top 10. There's too many good ones, man. There's loads in here, but I respect what it did for the genre as a whole. And if we're talking from a purely technical perspective and putting it in context, it is great and it works. But just because you were first doesn't necessarily mean you are still the best.
Ooh, write it down. What about you, Kirsten? How do you feel about the Halloween opening?
Yeah, it's a brilliant opening. I think it was very good for its time. And like Josh said, I don't think it necessarily works as well now, just because it's just, we expect something different now. I think the only film that I've seen recently that got close, and I say close, it wasn't really a POV sort of shot, but it was in The Conjuring 2, I think it was, and where it's kind of from the perspective more than an actual point of view, but it was from the perspective of Elaine Warren, and she's going through the Amityville house, and she's experiencing what happened through this guy's eyes. And there's a really good moment where she turns and she like looks in the mirror, and it's not her reflection, she's seeing like a man's reflection. And that's probably the closest I think you can get, which is they've kind of got a twist on it where it's like, this is what she's seeing, I guess, instead of what we're seeing, which is really interesting. But yeah, just kind of going for the actual point of view, as in you are a camera and you are kind of making your way through and murdering people. It's very cheesy, which nowadays just it doesn't work. Back then it was fine because cheese was still scary. That's just what horror was back then. But now it's like, no, cheesy's not scary. It has to be actually like blood, gore, guts, thrills. It has to be like it has to be scary. And yeah, unfortunately, cheese just isn't scary anymore.
Whoa, these are big words come from you guys. I was gonna be like, yeah, Halloween's great, really like it. I like the typography and the font that it delivers, and the little picture of a pumpkin on fire. So well.
Hey, now if we're talking purely about the font and the pumpkin, I'm 10 out of 10 movies, still the best thing ever.
10 out of 10 on the pumpkin. Do you guys have any other openings that you feel like deserve a shout out that we haven't got round to? Because I'm going to wrap this up soon, but I don't want to do it if there is more that need praising and bringing up. Because there's two that I think deserve a little mention for doing something different, which is Creepshow, which is just wonderful. I love anthology movies that start with a little spooky anthology just to set you off a bit. It's like when you're getting a whole set of films and they give you one very short one at the beginning to be like, oh, it's going to begin now. And then Creepshow taking from the comics and turning it into still animated intro. I just love it. I love it. I always think of that when I think of Creepshow, and the little the skeleton man at the window being like, I think it's such a good opening. It fills me with joy thinking about it. And the other would be the stepfather, because I feel like that says everything that you need to know in an opening, like instantly. There's no words. It's encapsulated in about 2 minutes, and it's just the stepfather, a man, wandering around his house, getting ready, getting washed and stuff. There's the original and the remake, and the original is covered in blood, gets washed, ready, changes himself and goes outside. I think in the remake, I'm not sure if he's covered in blood or not, but he does the same, gets already washed, goes outside. And as he comes downstairs and goes outside and walks around his kitchen, you realise all of the family are dead around him and the house is trashed. And he's just walking out in his like little business suit, all American Psycho, going do-do-do-do-do-do. And I feel like that was such a good opening. I can't tell you what happens in the rest of the movie because I've wiped it from my memory, but the opening definitely is an absolute banger, and I would like to see more rip it off, to be honest. I feel like it's a good one that could be taken and used elsewhere as well.
I completely forgot about that, to be honest. Like you, Ash, I'd eliminated that from my memory for whatever reason. I forgot how effective that is. I couldn't go this entire podcast without mentioning, well, we've already mentioned Midsommar, but I want to mention it again because I think that's so good. Especially after Hereditary. It more or less, at least for me, gave me exactly what I wanted from a new Ari Aster movie, which is that kind of nastiness that Hereditary kind of trades in the way the camera like kind of glides through that house, and it gives you snippets of, you know, the first responders and kind of snippets of what might have happened. Then you get that awful kind of glide past the woman's face on the floor, which is just harrowing. Then into the email, which establishes the main character. Then the wailing of Florence Pugh while the camera again glides out the window to the title cards. Oh, nectar! One of the best of all time. Probably in my personal top 5, dead or alive. But apart from them, I would say the first 3 George Romero Dead movies, I think, are great examples of how you can just jump straight into it. Obviously, the first one, Night of the Living Dead, takes a little longer than the rest to get going. You have Barbara and Johnny going to the graveyard, but then Dawn of the Dead starts in medias res, and you get like straight into the action. The world's going to hell, and then by Day of the Dead, it's just a great summation of how far the world has come in between the sequels. You've got a proper post-apocalyptic landscape. You have that absolutely great jump scare dream right at the very beginning where all the hands come through the wall. And I just think they're great kind of way. They all act as a great way to just kick you straight into the plot. There's no real messing around. It's just, here's the state of the world. Everything's gone to hell. These are your main characters that you more or less care about instantly. And there you go, you're off to the races. There's no wasted time, and they just manage to be so effective. It's just a shame that they kind of trail off after that. But I still love Day of the Dead especially.
Yeah, the remake of Dawn of the Dead took like the intro madness and did so well with it. Like I feel like every time Dawn of the Dead's brought up, I'm like, yeah, but the remake, yeah, but Zack Snyder, which is a bit sacrilege, but also, yeah, but Zack Snyder's version. I think those are really great shouts. How about you, Kirsten?
Yeah, I think they're all brilliant shout, guys. The Creepshow, Midsommar, and the remake of Dawn of the Dead, they're all fantastic. But I'm just going to shout out 2 that I think had really brilliant openings, but led into just not that great a film. And that's It Follows, which I think had a brilliant opening to sort of lead you into being like, what the hell am I watching? And then just kind of not be that interesting of a film. It was a really good concept and an interesting concept, but I just didn't think it was that scary. And then the second one is The Nun. I think that had a brilliant opening and it set it up. It's within the Conjuring universe, so I was super excited. And it sets you up, and you know how, I mean, The Nun is just a scary monster anyway. She looks terrifying, so I was super excited to see it. And then just to have this opening where it sort of all takes place, and it's like a really slow build down this really creepy corridor, and it was just so well done. And then the film just turned out to just be really lackluster and boring, and it was just such a shame to have something start so fantastically and then just so quickly go downhill. It's just such a shame. So I just wish that they would have been better, but good cold opens nonetheless.
Excellent choices. No, I think the horror movie opening, it's got to be good. You got to start off high. You can kind of pull it back from a bad place, but if you're not starting off on the right foot, then certainly you're not going to end on one, or we're not going to watch it to the end, or whatever. We probably should have mentioned When a Stranger Calls, but I didn't, because it's 20 minutes, that opening, and I don't count 20 minutes as an opening. That is just a film. But yeah, that has been our lovely little horror podcast on horror openings. Perhaps we'll talk about endings next week. You'll have to wait and see. Yeah, I'm just telling you guys now, I'm probably going to talk about endings next week.
Right.
But yeah, thank you for joining us all, guys. If you want to tell us what you think about openings, what are your favorite openings, then please put it in the comments section below. You can talk to us on Twitter with the hashtag WCHorror. And if you are particularly interested in horror movie openings, there are a couple of lists on the channel, which I know I've written and put on there, so you can enjoy those in a bit more detail as well if you want some recommendations for good openings. A lot of the stuff is what we spoke about in this, but go and check out the content there as well, because I've got to plug Plug. For now, though, I have been Ash, and I've been joined by Kirsten. Say goodbye, Kirsten.
Goodbye.
And I've been joined by Josh as well. Say goodbye, Josh.
Goodbye.
Oh, I was expecting goodbye, Josh, then. But
Yeah,
The gimmick's over. The
you
gimmick's
ruined
over.
it.
We've had
I
5
saw
weeks
you
to
like
make it up.
clear your throat, ready for it. I was like, oh, here it is. Here's the crack. But yeah, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you again more with some. We'll see you again some more with some more spooky stuff to talk about. But yeah, thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.